You know we are getting really close to football season when I just put out rankings just a couple days ago, and we've already had 8 total players that took a nosedive in my fantasy rankings. We're going through those changes today because they need real big discussion. Just make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. And of course, really quick, if you did not see my last video, we're closing in on 20,000 subscribers. Thanks to you guys because you guys are awesome. What I'm doing is I'm giving away 5 free new Fantasy Football Roundup hats to 5 random people who are subscribed to the channel, drop a like on this video, and give me their hottest take for 2025 Fantasy Football. So for a chance to win one of these free legendary hats that are brand new, go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and give me your hottest take for 2025. So the first guy that I want to talk about today is Brian Robinson Jr. Now, Brian Robinson Jr., I will say this, that I have not really been big on Brian Robinson Jr. basically the entire offseason. I thought last year would be a good time for him to break out, and it doesn't look like this is going to be his year either. So just to paint a picture of this one, right? Brian Robinson Jr. just a couple days ago ended up reports dropping that they're listening to teams' offers, and I thought, whatever. Maybe it will happen before the season. Maybe it'll happen during the season when there's teams that need running backs that end up calling. Then we get an even worse report for Brian Robinson Jr., which is that the Commanders, according to Ian Rappaport, are willing to absorb some of Brian Robinson Jr.'s salary to facilitate a trade. What this should tell you is this: Brian Robinson Jr. will not be a Washington Commander. What this should also tell you is that they are willing to sell him as a backup. They don't care if he doesn't make anyone else's team. They're willing to trade him and pay for some of his salary. So this should tell you a couple things. Number one, the likelihood of Brian Robinson Jr. going to a different backfield and getting the same level of offense that he had in Washington is already a pretty slim proposition. But this should also tell you that a team could get Brian Robinson Jr. as a backup running back. This also tells me that Washington is very confident in what they have behind Brian Robinson Jr. Now, for Brian Robinson Jr., it's bad enough for him. He has dropped to Travis Etienne, Zach Charbonnet range in my personal rankings at the running back position, which would put him somewhere between top 35 to top 40 running backs. This completely tanked his stock in my book in fantasy football. But then, of course, we think about where do they go from here? Well, I think that when you're thinking about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who is a 7th-round running back for the Washington Commanders this year, he is starting to get some serious hype in Washington right now. Now, originally he was listed as like the running back 5 on the depth chart behind everybody else on the team. Now he's listed as the running back 3 on the depth chart. And if you have watched him, he does look like one of their more explosive backs. While there is a ranking change for Brian Robinson Jr., you should be very focused on these 2 backs in particular in Washington. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and then you should also be focused on Chris Rodriguez. Now, the beauty of Chris Rodriguez is I do believe that he will be available via waiver wire at the beginning of the season because everybody's attention is going to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. So I do think it's very worthy to keep an eye on Chris Rodriguez as well. But I will say that JCM probably does have the best amount of upside with the most explosion in this running back room on the offense. Now, the next guy that I want to talk about here, I actually brought this up a little bit in my wide receiver rankings. A.J. Brown has been quietly dealing with a hamstring injury for weeks now and is not practiced with the Philadelphia Eagles. This has gone very under the radar for some reason or another. Now, you might say to me, well, this one isn't new, so why did all of a sudden he tank in the rankings? Nick Sirianni has been making some weird comments about this one. A couple days ago, Nick Sirianni said that A.J. Brown was, quote, working through some things. That's already an interesting thing to say. Now, he may have just been talking about injury and maybe he's not well-spoken enough and he couldn't say that correctly for whatever reason. Or maybe he meant something else, which I will get to here in a minute. He also has been very vague about his week 1 availability. When he was asked directly about it, he was very work-around-ish, saying, yeah, we want to make sure everybody's ready for week 1. So that does not instill any confidence to me that he's going to be playing. Now, there was a video that dropped just yesterday, as of the time of this recording, that A.J. Brown was doing some work and working on the side of the field, trying to get his strength back up in that hammy. And he looked definitely slow when he was trying to run. Now, I'm sure he was trying to take it easy on that hammy, but at the same time, we are not far out from their season opener, which, keep in mind, is the Thursday night game versus the Dallas Cowboys. So A.J. Brown did drop only one spot below Jackson Smith-Njigba. So you might say to me, well, that sounds like nothing. It doesn't sound like it's even worth the discussion. But it is a lot, because I had discussed on the wide receiver rankings that I made just on this past Sunday that I believe there was a big teardrop between A.J. Brown and Jackson Smith-Njigba, because I believe JSN doesn't have the same level of upside that A.J. does when healthy. And I do still believe that. But I sense something that's coming around here. A.J. Brown has reportedly been unhappy with Jalen Hurts and with the Eagles for a long time now. I mean, this dates back to the Super Bowl, and even before the Super Bowl victory that they just had in 2024-2025. So this one is interesting to me, because when you look at the Nick Sirianni report that I just showed you, working through some stuff, very quiet about this injury. Is it really what's holding him out? I'm sure the injury is playing a factor, but I wonder if something deeper is going on here. And there's something that we're not seeing, because I am sensing something with this A.J. Brown thing. I have my spidey senses up on this one. I don't know how this one's going to end, but I do have a feeling that something deeper is going on. Maybe it's more money that he wants. Maybe he just wants out of the Eagles. I'm not sure, but I do smell something a little off in this one. Now, next guy that I want to go through here is going to be Breece Hall. And I do think that this one deserves more time, because I already have covered it in my recent top 30 running back rankings. And you guys know exactly where he's placed. And he has not moved since then if you've watched that video. I have long been worried about this Breece Hall situation in 2025 with the Jets. All offseason, all we had heard from Aaron Glenn, the head coach who arrived this offseason, as soon as he got there, was saying, yeah, we kind of like the idea of a two-headed running back monster, a three-headed running back monster. Now, up to that point, it wasn't anything that we had seen come to fruition yet. It was all just speculation, just talk. So you could have been thinking to yourself, okay, well, when training camp actually gets here, and he's seeing all of his other options, Breece Hall is the most talented of the bunch, so theoretically he should rise to the top and make it kind of impossible for them to justify taking him off the field for Isaiah Davis or Braylon Allen. But this has been confirmed through 2 straight preseason games. You can see on the screen right now that the Jets did not have Isaiah Davis in their Week 3 preseason matchup because of an injury. So we don't have, I guess, full clarity on the depths of this committee. But I think if you just take Week 1 alone and look at Isaiah Davis's involvement with particularly the starters and the second stringers, I would say that it's a really reasonable expectation for Isaiah Davis to get some level of work in this offense. But it was Breece Hall as the starter on first and second down, but Braylon Allen came in on third downs and even fourth and short carries in the Jets' recent preseason game. Now, you might say to me, well, third down backs don't really mean too much, because there is evidence and research out there to suggest that. And I would agree with you to a certain extent. But we are talking about one of the worst offenses that will be available in 2025. And if you are on one of those offenses, you need every touch you can get. And Breece Hall does not look like he will be getting every single one of those running back touches out of the backfield. Braylon Allen will absolutely have a role in third and short and fourth and short for the Jets this year. This is not good for Breece Hall. What we have seen happen to Breece Hall under this new administration in New York is he has been relegated to a low-end starting running back in the NFL. It's very sad. Like, this is one of the most talented backs in the league, in my opinion, and he has been relegated to running back committee duties. It's really sad, but he did have to drop to 17 below Travion Henderson, who is definitely rising for complete opposite reasons because he is showing out while Breece Hall apparently is not. Now, the next guy that I want to talk about here, I've been trying to tell everybody this one all offseason. Caleb Johnson's stock is dropping in the fantasy community. Now, what's unfortunate about this one is, like I said, I have been trumpeting this one all offseason long about how this is what you are seeing is par for the course for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But a lot of fantasy creators out there, and they know who they are, and you know who they are, have been telling you that Caleb Johnson is a great pick in fantasy football drafts. So if you missed the recent preseason game, Jaylen Warren rested with the starters. So that should tell you immediately that Jaylen Warren was going to be the starting running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But what even got more interesting was the fact that Kenneth Gainwell took the first snaps for the backfield. And yes, while Caleb Johnson did show well in his snaps in this preseason game, Kenneth Gainwell was playing ahead of Caleb Johnson. Now, does this mean that Kenneth Gainwell will be starting over Caleb Johnson? Were Jaylen Warren to go down? I personally do not believe so. I believe the Steelers will play Caleb Johnson if Jaylen Warren goes down. But this should tell you multiple things right here. What I have been saying all offseason long, the Steelers are a slow-moving franchise. They are not like the rest of the league, whether you like it or not. The Pittsburgh Steelers are an old-school, conservative franchise that wants to have the rookies, quote, earn it. And they are not doing anything different with Caleb Johnson right now. So as I've been saying all offseason, Jaylen Warren will be the starter for this offense because I have a news flash for you. They really like Jaylen Warren over there in Pittsburgh. This is a fact. And honestly, to be fair to the Pittsburgh Steelers, week 1 in the preseason for Caleb Johnson was really, really gross. Like, he averaged less than 3 yards per carry in that game. It was disgusting if you want to know the truth. Now, this week 2 preseason game was much better for Caleb Johnson. And I do think that there is a reason to hope that Caleb Johnson will have a bigger role as the season moves on. But this team has no plans for him to be their immediate starter right out of the gate. So what I did with Caleb Johnson just a couple days ago is I actually just decided to myself, why is he inside my top 30 when I know he will not start for this team right out of the gate? He moved out of my top 30 running backs and into running back 31 through 34 range, right around the J.K. Dobbins and Jordan Masons of the world. Now, I do still expect him to have a role in the back half of the season because I don't believe Jaylen Warren will hold up for a full workload as they plan to give him, and I do think Caleb Johnson is a good back, but this offense still does suck. So when they give him more work, do not have high expectations on this one. And I've been trying to tell everyone all offseason about this one. So please don't draft him if you have not drafted a fantasy team already. Now, the next guy I want to talk about here, this one is still crazy to me, how everybody just got all excited about Quinshon Judkins just a couple days ago. So Quinshon Judkins, it feels like this should be an easy decision to make because it's still just an utter disaster. Quinshon Judkins, after the recent news, some people were excited to hear that his return to the Cleveland Browns could be very, very imminent. Now, if you did miss this whole Quinshon Judkins fiasco, here's the full story. So back in like early July, apparently there was an incident with his girlfriend. At the time, I don't know if they're still together. Apparently, he hit her, beat her down, and got arrested for it. He spent a while in jail. And then there was, a lot of charges brought against him for domestic violence. And he missed a lot of team activities during training camp. And he had not been signed up to this point. Now, the recent news that dropped was that prosecutors declined to press charges on the Cleveland Browns running back Quinshon Judkins. But where it gets very interesting here is that obviously after that news, people started to really want to rise Quinshon Judkins in their running back rankings. And not only has he still not returned to the team, he is still an unsigned running back for the Cleveland Browns. I don't know if it's because he wants guaranteed money and they won't give him any at this point, or if they just haven't hit their number yet. But it's very interesting that the Browns have reportedly not committed to this one, and they may not until this NFL investigation on this situation concludes. So while prosecutors agreed to not press charges and pursue charges on Quinshon Judkins, the NFL is still likely to drop a big punishment on Quinshon Judkins. And I've been talking about Rashee Rice all offseason and about how I believe that he will not be suspended for more than 4 or 5 games in the NFL. I believe that when you look at history with vehicular incidents, it is around that 4 to 5 game range. Now, the other hand, ever since the Rashee Rice situation back in the 2010s, they have been very, very hard on domestic violence incidents. So if this team finds a lot of evidence that's undisputable that Quinshon Judkins is in fact guilty of what he did I would not be shocked whatsoever if Quinshon Judkins received 10 or more game suspension in 2025. He did get a bump up in my rankings after that news that the prosecutors agreed to not pursue charges on him. It was never a good idea in reality to do that because it still is a complete disaster situation. Because even when Quinshon Judkins comes back, if he does, this guy needs to be onboarded to the team because he missed so much offseason work for this team. When will they actually feel comfortable putting him in their offense? And then the cherry on top of that, don't forget, guys, this is already a terrible offense. So what is the real upside for Quinshon Judkins here? This guy goes back down to my Najee Harris, Tyler Algier, Will Shipley territory for running backs in the 50-ish range. This could be even a waiver wire guy. If he actually does work out, for me, I don't think there's any point to draft him. If he makes it to you on waivers, maybe give him a shot. And speaking of the waiver wire, the biggest thing in the fantasy sports community is about to drop. We have been working on technology for years now that has automated the waiver wire process in all of fantasy sports, not just fantasy football. This has never been brought to the fantasy space before. What you can do through this technology is you can hook up your Yahoo League, your ESPN League, to our website, and it will automate the waiver wire process for you. So instead of having to wake yourself up at 2, 3 a.m. whenever your waivers run and grab your priority ad after the waivers are complete, you can let the waiver wire tool do everything for you so you can sleep peacefully at night. The value that this brings you is something you can't even imagine because it's never been brought to the space before. And unlike most creators who are just giving you their rankings behind a paywall, this is something behind a paywall that will actually help you win not only your fantasy football league, but let's say you play fantasy basketball, fantasy hockey, fantasy baseball. This will help you win all of those leagues as well and win real money attached to them. The value that we are bringing with this tool cannot be overstated. It has never been brought to the space before. So right now, just go to fsroundup.com to just check out the website. The waiver wire tool will be officially ready for you guys, my audience, in late August, early September, just in time for the fantasy football season, and you will not want to miss it because, like I said, it's giving you more value than you could ever imagine. Now, the next guy I want to talk about is Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon, this injury thing has been a complete mystery box all offseason, and not in a good way. And it's still a mystery to this very, very day. So if alarm bells weren't already ringing on this one, they should be so loud at this point that they're impossible to ignore at this point in the fantasy football season. This has been an ankle injury he's been dealing with all offseason. So Joe Mixon recently, there was a report that came out that he could start the season on the NFI injury list. The non-football injury list is where Joe Mixon could be starting out the season in 2025. This is really, really gross. Joe Mixon is already a running back that is at an age where it is not ideal to take a shot on these guys. And add on an injury that has been plaguing him all offseason, I am not in on this situation right here. Now, to be completely fair, this guy has moved down most people's rankings for weeks now because it has been a really, really bad uncertainty that we have been dealing with, again, since the start of training camp and well beyond that. I've actually, in my own rankings, though, if you're familiar, I have been holding a place for him inside the top 25 because I believe in the upside that he could bring if he were to play for the Houston Texans to start in week 1. At this point, I am not in on that because the reason I was holding him there also was because I didn't love his backups, though. But what I have seen through 2 preseason games for the Houston Texans is 2 things. Number 1, Nick Chubb actually looked good in this recent preseason game. He had 5 carries for 25 yards. That's 5 a pop. That's a really good number right there, and basically around what he has done throughout his entire career. Woody Marks, the rookie running back, has looked pretty good as well. I don't think the Texans are going to force this one on themselves if he is not ready to go. So there's already concerns that I have with Joe Mixon outside of the injury. This just makes it so much worse. So I have officially dropped Joe Mixon to running back 28 in my own personal rankings. Again, this is how fast things can change during this part of the offseason because at this point, I think it's actually kind of unlikely that he's ready to go in week 1. Now, the last two guys that I want to cover here go hand in hand. We're staying in Houston for both Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, who are working behind Xavier Hutchinson and Christian Kirk with the starting offense alongside Nico Collins. Now, the beauty about this one is I do still think that these two guys could break through at some point in the season. And I do think that whoever does, if not both of them, will have a really good amount of upside with a pass-first offense and a good quarterback with CJ Stroud. But what is not questionable at this point is that the Texans are not moving that way right out of the gate. In their recent preseason game, Xavier Hutchinson played above both rookies, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. Now, that one is particularly more valid for Jaden Higgins because Higgins would, in theory, be their outside wide receiver opposite Nico Collins. Christian Kirk, on the other hand, is taking Jalen Noel's potential spot in this offense in the slot. So the Texans have no immediate interest to just shove these guys right into their starting lineup. These two Iowa State wide receivers that they drafted in rounds 2 and 3, without Diggs, without Tank Dell, there was a lot of upside for them to start right away. It does not look like the Texans are going to do that. Now, like I said, I will say that I see at least one of these guys, if not both, breaking through at some point in the season. Hopefully, it's going to be sooner than later. And I still think that they're worthy in redraft leagues, particularly with Jaden Higgins. But I do think that they're best applicable at this point in a best ball league, because I cannot decide when I believe that these guys will take the leap. Because if you've actually watched these guys throughout the preseason, Jaden Higgins has not looked particularly great, particularly in this last preseason game where he had a drop, and he was also flagged for holding over the weekend as well. So the team cannot be impressed with what they've seen so far with Jaden Higgins. And Jalen Noel, on top of that, I wouldn't say has been bad, but he has not been anything special. So it's nothing worth having over a proven NFL player like Christian Kirk at this point. Again, I still do think that Xavier Hutchinson and Christian Kirk, that's a thinly veiled group right there at the wide receiver 2 and 3 spot. But there's no question that it seems less and less likely that these two guys will have a role right away out of the gate. So Jaden Higgins, originally a couple weeks ago, I did move him above Keon Coleman in my wide receiver 45 territory. Right now, he's back down around the Chris Godwin territory, around the Luther Burden territory in the wide receiver 50 to 55 range. Now, on the other hand, I am still above consensus on Jalen Noel. He was in the Rashad Bateman territory for me, the Michael Pittman territory for me in fantasy rankings. But for me right now, he is back down to Trey Harris and Demario Douglas tier. So let me know what players you are avoiding in 2025. And if you do want to see the top 30 running back rankings for 2025 fantasy football, click on this video right here.